Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Sorry we started too late. Gillian and Neil and Catherine were on another Zoom, so I
Oh, okay.
have to go and politely ask them first. So hopefully people will turn up soon. Hope it hasn't put people off.
I mean, I find that with Zoom calls, people don't tend to join till like literally the time it starts rather than a few minutes before. So,
yeah. We'll see. Is everything going okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yeah, if you could just sort of take part and take some notes as we go along, so I don't have to think about writing things down as well as kind of going through the agenda, that'd be really helpful. Great. You're in a different space? You're not using the kitchen for Zooming today?
No, I'm in my bedroom, sitting on my bed.
Yes, I've reached a point where I've decided I've got to get a desk to put in the bedroom because I can't carry on sitting on the bed to work every day.
Yeah. No, I might move into the kitchen. I'm trying to work out where Natalie's on night shifts at the moment, so she's in bed at the moment. So I'm trying to work out where she's least likely to hear me. So I've got headphones on, so she can sleep. But so I might be a bit quiet.
Fair enough. Oh, here we go. Oh, hang on. I'm struggling here. There we go. Good morning, everyone. You've all turned up at once. That's lovely.
Morning.
Good morning. Okay. Oh. Yes. Thanks for joining, everyone. We're waiting for one more person that I know of who I have lined up to do an opening prayer for us. So I think we'll wait for Marie to appear and then we'll get started. I'm just going to check if there's anyone else we're expecting.
Hello.
Oh. Aha, right. Hello, Marie.
No, Sue. Oh. Liam?
Hello.
It's Sue.
Hi, yeah. Oh, sorry, I thought it was Marie was just appearing. Sorry, hi, Sue. What's up?
What I'd really like to do is not do it on this tablet.
Yeah.
And do it on my laptop. But when I try to connect on my laptop, it says the host is in a meeting.
That's weird. Yeah, I am in a meeting. I'm in this meeting.
I know.
There was another meeting going on until a minute ago, so maybe that's confusing it. So you might be worth trying again.
It's just that this tablet doesn't have much battery.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe try the laptop again now and we'll give you a minute.
Okay. Right, I'll just close this down then in case that confuses things.
Hi.
Hi, Al. Printer problems.
Right, so.
Right, I'm just going to look at who we're waiting for, if anyone. Oh, there's 11 people signed up now. All right. Yeah, there's one more person who's signed up and hasn't turned up yet, which is Jan Such Pickard. So I think if it's okay, if we wait another minute or two to see if she turns up for a chance. Oh, and see if Sue reappears as well.
Yeah, here comes Sue.
Ah, there we go. Hi, Sue. Are you on your laptop now?
Yes, I am. I'm just propping it up on some books.
Right.
So that actually, you're not looking at my double chin all the time.
Oh, no, I don't want to do that. I've actually had my first. I've had my first pandemic haircut, Chris. So I don't know what that says about Sarah. You should have seen how I looked last week. I had a bit of a mullet going on.
I've got a mullet because the only bit I can cut is the front bit. It's all growing out the back.
Just had my second, and it was better than the first.
Oh, hi, Al.
Hi, Sue.
Right, how are we doing for time? I wonder if we shall make a start and just see if Jan arrives as we're going on, as it's been about 5 minutes. Oh, hang on, I'm just going to check the chat. Yeah. Okay, so we'll do proper introduction. I think everyone probably knows each other anyway, but we'll do some introductions in a minute. Oh yeah, well we'll do some introductions, but I've asked Marie to prepare a little opening prayer. So if we'll start with that, if that's okay, Marie. Shall we all mute ourselves to listen, or what's best?
You can. I'm not going to make you say anything. So no. Yeah.
I'm mute in case of background noise.
We had a lovely. I've been doing regular prayers with my regulars at Catherine House, and we had a lovely thing at Pentecost where they each brought a reading. So somebody brought me this reading. It's a poem called "Suddenly There Came a Sound," and it's by someone called Andrew King. I have no idea who he is. But I thought this would be a good thing to open with, so I'm going to read that and then a little prayer. So suddenly there became a sound. It was one of those days where leaves are thrashed from tree branches writhing under a racing sky, and my childhood friend playing outdoors with me wondered, does the wind ever stop blowing? And does it stop somewhere, he asked again, or does it just keep going around and around the world? Back then I said I didn't know, but now I know there came a day when a wind began in a certain house that filled with a light like flame. That wind had the roar of justice, and that wind had the rush of love, and that wind had the whisper of peace and compassion, and it carried the words of hope and joy to an anxious and needy world. And it was gentle enough to touch the wounded soul, and it was strong enough to stir ever-seeking hearts of women and men, young and old, from city to distant shores. And it pulled down walls of distrust and fear and threw open doors of possibility. And oaks of hatred have bent in its path, and palisades of pain have fallen to its strength. And new life has spread like scattered seed. And yes, my friend, that wind circles the world. And no, it has never stopped blowing. Let us pray. Inspire us, wind of God, in our work and our discussion. Help us to pull down walls of ignorance and fear. Help us to open doors to compassion. Help us to listen to those who have no voice and use our own to shout out. Help us to help you to build the world anew. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Marie. Okay. It's really nice to see you all here. It's good that we're able to meet like this, because we should have been meeting in person, at least some of us today, in fact. So I'm glad that we're doing this. I'll talk a bit about what I'm hoping to get from this for Church Action on Poverty and what I'm hoping we can do in a minute. But I thought maybe first we'll do some quick introductions, and maybe if each of you could say who you are, where you're from, where you're calling from. And I thought with the theme we're talking about today, if you could share one thing that has given you hope during lockdown, be nice. And I'll go around in the order that I can see you on my screen. So I'll ask Felicity first, if that's okay.
Hi, I'm Felicity. I'm sitting on my bed in my bedroom in Manchester. For those who don't know, I'm intern at Church Action on Poverty, and something that's given me hope during lockdown, I found it's amazing how connected I've been with people. In some ways, despite the fact I'm not really leaving my flat, I'm actually more connected with sort of friends from home and uni, like, you know, yeah, so finding connections, ways to stay in touch, which I hadn't been doing before. So yeah.
Okay. Chris Howson's next on my screen.
Yeah, well, I'm Chris Howson. I'm a university chaplain up in Sunderland and the northeast of England. And I guess well, I can't say the same thing as you, Felicity, but I was going to say connection. You know, yesterday I was on a Zoom meeting with Sabeel and being in contact with Palestinian liberation theologians who are struggling against stuff there, and black African American activists in the States in Minnesota. So the Zoom has suddenly made everything very, very immediate. So that's been extraordinary. But I probably found more hope on just being able to enjoy nature around me a little bit more. I know it's a very boring thing to say, but I am noticing details in nature, and I've seen more dolphins this lockdown than ever in the entire 50 years. So there are things like that give me some bit of hope.
Thanks, Chris. I've got Al next.
Hi there, I'm
Key
Al Barrett.
dolphins.
No dolphins in Birmingham, which is really unfair. The thing I'm really missing is the seaside, but Chris has been sending me photos occasionally, which I've been really grateful for. I live in the Fairs and Bromford estate on the edge of Birmingham, and the thing that has given me hope at the moment, some of our neighbours have created a community treehouse space in the Bluebell Woods just down the road from us, and that's a hidden gem in the middle of our otherwise quite grey estate. And it's been trashed and burnt and taken to pieces a few times, and every time our neighbours have come back and rebuilt it and remade it and made it more beautiful than it was before. And that is a remarkable, enduring sign of hope and defiant resilience in this time, I think.
Thanks, Al. I've got Nick next.
Yeah, hi, Nick from Dillington in south of Rotherham, retired vicar. My wife's still the rector of Dillington, but she's about to retire. I think the hopeful sign I could say is that we have a neighbour who hardly ever talks to us and who never does anything outside that you ever see. But during the clapping on Thursday evening, she's been coming out and clapping and smiling at me. Amazing. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. Judith next.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Judith Jessup. I'm a Methodist pioneer minister on Parson Cross Council Estate, or former Council Estate in Sheffield. What's been hopeful? Actually, it's because of the weather, though not today. The warm, sunny weather has meant that people have been outdoors more. I have found a number of things to take to my bin, which is all that's happening on the front of my property. I don't have a garden on the front, so I keep popping out. And we've just had amazing conversations as people have been gardening or doing whatever, and during the clapping, it's extended beyond the clapping. We've had conversations, and a sense of solidarity has grown up among some in the street, perhaps over and against those who are the more nuisance residents, the drug dealers, the users of drugs, and all that sort of thing.
Thank you. Steph next.
Hi, I'm Steph. I'm in Manchester. I do research on disability and social security. I think I've been encouraged by some of my local churches that I'm in a number of mutual aid groups on Facebook, and it's quite noticeable that the one that's the most active and does the most to help people is the one that was founded by one of our local churches. So it's been nice that at least in some places Christians are taking a lead and being at the forefront of helping their neighbours.
Thank you. Marie?
Hi, I'm in well, I'm not in Manchester at all. I'm in Bury because I'm in my flat. So yes, and not normally I would be at work at Catherine House and you would all be with me. I'm director of a retreat house, and the thing that's given me hope, I want to say Little Swan family. I've had the time to go for walks, and I've discovered like beautiful like green space is really, really near me. I can't beat dolphins, but like baby swans.
Thanks. Chris Hughes next.
Hi, I'm Chris Hughes. I'm a Roman Catholic priest working in North Shields, which is about 6 miles east of Newcastle. What's given me hope has been a kind of group that I've been working about the concerns about free school meals, free school meal campaign associated with, I also belong to Tyneware Citizens. And two people, especially one, Kath, who's a wonderful mother of 9 children and grandmother, and has really been vociferous, and also David Watson, who's a head teacher of a school, very quiet, unassuming man, but he's really put his head above the parapet and raising concerns about children not getting free school meals and what's been made available, and the poverty of the response of the government. And he's really kind of been active and taking a lead, and it's just great to see people really flourishing and taking responsibility and stepping up. That gives me hope.
Thanks, Chris. And last on my screen, Sue.
So I'm Sue Richardson, and normally I work for Christian Aid, but I'm furloughed at the moment. And strictly speaking, I shouldn't be working at all, but I didn't think this was work. I thought this was kind of leisure activity, or certainly therapy. So I thought it would be okay to join. What's given me hope? Well, to be honest, we've always had quite a good community around us. We're really lucky with our neighbours. So I haven't seen any noticeable changes there, except, you know, people have always been willing to help out, and they are still willing to help out. But I have noticed that there is a growing understanding, I think, of how choices made previously might affect current experience. You know, I bemoan the lack of analysis in British society over and over again, how we so often just take things, go and complain, and then, you know, never really put them together to make a picture that we're then determined to do something about. So I've heard more thoughtful and critical, obviously, but analytical conversations than perhaps I've heard for a long time. So that's the kind of communal thing. And also the fact that we can get along without so much we thought was absolutely essential. You know, I was so disappointed when one of the first things people did out of lockdown was go to IKEA. We have an IKEA not too far away. The queues to get in were miles long. And I just thought, is this what liberation is? Being able to go to IKEA. I like IKEA, I'm not against it, but so what I've really liked is the fact that it's changed the pace of life, and it's shown us that we don't have to have everything we think we need immediately. And then for us, my husband's just newly retired, and this wasn't the retirement he thought he was going to have, but we have sat a lot in our garden, which we're blessed to have, and birds have got used to us. So now we can sit and they will come down on the feeder, you know, just feet away, and eat and complain if they don't get what they think they need. And I go in and get some more, and it comes out. And it's been absolutely fascinating to develop relationships with particular birds. So that's a positive. And, you know, the weather has helped, as Judith said, because if it had been pouring with rain, I think we would all have been a lot more stressed.
Great. And I'm Liam. I do communications at Church Action on Poverty, and I haven't had nice relationships with birds or dolphins, but I have seen some very friendly squirrels in the park, which was nice. And particularly Zoom and the new possibilities it's opening up for us. We've been doing all kinds of creative things with it, and we've had a lot of positive feedback from our groups in Sheffield in the northeast, particularly about how they're able to connect in and share things a lot more than they were, and we're going to carry on using the technology to do stuff afterwards. And also we've had an encouraging number of kind of people with lived experience of poverty being able to take part in these and having their voices heard in the conversations we're having, which is important. So that's good. Yeah. I'm just gonna, what I'm hoping to do today, well, we've lined up these 4 different sessions to talk about different things that the collective can get involved in and help us with at Church Action on Poverty. And the first one is this idea of a positive vision for the future. And we've been doing a lot of thinking about that in our staff team, because there's a lot when you start looking out for it, there's an enormous amount of thinking and writing going on about how this is a chance for us to think differently, and how the pandemic has kind of torn up old ideas of how things were being done and shown the problems with the systems we had, and it's a chance for us to have a vision of a different way of doing things. So we wanted to be part of that conversation, and we've been thinking a lot about it. So I put together the document that I shared. Can I check first, have people had a chance to look at that? No. So it's probably helpful if I quickly summarise what we're up to.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, we've been trying to think about what we can do to be part of the conversation and to speak out and share a vision. And I've been just summarising a lot of the stuff I've seen out there, because there's all kinds of writing going on about it. And the key things I've kind of tried to put across in that document is talking about the sense that this is, we're all on a journey together, and that we've seen how things can be different during the response to lockdown, and the way that communities have responded, and the way that governments have had to kind of just ignore all their old ideology and do things differently. And it's a chance for us to say to people, we can hold on to those values. We've remembered what's important to us. We need to not go back to business as usual after this. We need to not use it as an opportunity for more austerity and more neoliberal economics. At Church Action on Poverty, we're not keen to get into sort of coming up with particular policy campaigns off the back of this. It's more about ways of doing things, and about saying, possibly, however we do things going forwards, trying to press for people who are affected by policies to have a say in the decisions that affect them, and things, and ways of doing things that are different is perhaps the way we'd do it. But the thing that I'm particularly keen to talk about today is reflecting theologically on it, and thinking what stories in our faith and what in our tradition is there that we can draw on to talk about this. So that's the main thing I'd like to talk about today. Just sort of open up some space and everyone share and talk about that, the theology behind all of this. And I'd like to make some time towards the end of the session to think about practically, what can we do? How should we in Church Action on Poverty, and how should we as the church be speaking out about this vision? So that's what I'd like to do. And then at the end, I want to make sure we have a bit of time to talk about the other gatherings of the collective that we've got coming up in the next weeks, and what we can usefully do as a collective, and what people are interested in. Has anyone, before we get into the particular questions I've got, has anyone got any sort of general thoughts about the document, or their own thoughts about positive visions for where we go after the pandemic? Is it a thing that's on people's minds? Just chip in, anyone who wants to, see if that works okay.
Can I actually reference somebody else who's on the call, Liam? Al, you wrote some stuff over Easter where you used the work of Shelley Rambo from the States and her sort of theology of trauma. And that struck me very profoundly. And in fact, I've shared it with some others, because the main thing she seemed to be emphasizing, or one of the main things she seemed to be emphasizing, was the resistance to rush from the trauma, the bad experience, Good Friday to Easter Sunday, and to emphasize this Holy Saturday time when you are remaining with what was hurtful or painful, I suppose gathering and sustaining and resourcing for what might come next. And so I'm really keen that we build anew, but I'm very concerned that if we just try to do that without in some way lamenting or recognizing what has gone wrong before and actually naming it and getting some consensus about naming it, then we'll skip over that time again, and we won't be surprised if all the lovely new things we want to put out there kind of crumble against the hard realities of a society and an ideology that hasn't really changed. Because, you know, I'm deeply cynical, and I suspect Conservatives doing socialist things.
Yeah.
So Al,
in that sense, could I just add to that I do think that that's absolutely right, and that we need to be. We've got the wrong people in power at the moment. We have the wrong people in power to make fundamental changes. So we need to work for a change of power. So we're talking about 4 years, and then I think there could be some hope of some substantial changes.
I mean, you might have seen some of the stuff I've written over this period, but the stuff I was writing just before all the lockdown, I still think is kind of is relevant. I just talked about liberation theology being about 3 essential patterns. One is solidarity, and that includes that grieving, Sue. I think that being in solidarity with the communities, particularly vulnerable communities, that have been affected more by this, and includes obviously solidarity with activists in the States, but also Black activists in the UK and throughout the world that are dealing with racism. So for me, I'm looking for solidarity, and I'm looking for, and the other thing I was talking mostly to refugee groups with mutual aid, and that was the sense that we cannot rely on our governments to help us out of this shit. You know, this Tory government might have done some unusual things, but it's going to look after its own, and therefore mutual aid amongst those of us who are working with vulnerable communities, it needs to be kind of enacted. And interesting enough, the COVID-19 has allowed the word mutual aid, you know, has now become mainstream. So it's not like we're talking to an alien void. We got language, and we understand what that language really means. It's not about working out where you can buy flour in the supermarket, but about actually how communities really survive and thrive. But the third one I talked about was dancing, and I wanted more dancing. I was talking mostly to refugee communities and partying hard. But it still seems after this, we are going to have to find new ways of celebrating life, and maybe that may take different forms now, given all the changes. But celebrating life, and that seems to me that that's part of the new thing, that the new creation, the new hope, the rebirth, being born again. There's something about all that is about celebrating beyond the pain. That's all I'm going to say. There you go. Sorry.
Thanks, Chris. I think Jan has joined us. Jan, can you hear us? We're seeing your candle at the moment.
Yeah, yes. I'm sorry that I was late. Life goes on, but I'm sorry I haven't heard what was said so far. But I will keep listening and yeah, try and add something. How much have I missed?
Well, we did some little introductions at the start, so maybe we could ask you to do that so everyone says hello. We were just saying who we are, where we're calling from, and one thing that's given us hope during the lockdown. So if you I don't want to put you on the spot, but would you be okay to do that?
Okay, right. I'm Jan. I'm calling from the Isle of Mull, and from a village called Benesson, and it has been very heartening to see how this tiny village community has pulled together, and we have deepened our knowledge of each other and the issues that confront us. I live in a small terrace of houses where, and my next door neighbour and I, applauding for the NHS, talked about how we could also say thank you to the shop workers, and that started a project which has involved the school children writing thank you in a whole lot of creative ways, in Smarties and on the sand and so on, and those being photographed and made into a book, and the book being produced by the local development group with donations to help it to happen. And we have now, copies of that book have gone to the shop people staffing our 3 tiny local shops in this part of Mull, and the whole group of carers who've held everything together, and the ferry boys, the posties, the surgery. So this has become a whole community thing. Creative. I think what has heartened me has been creativity like that. The freeing of creativity that comes to people naturally if you don't clamp down on it and say, oh no, there's only a proper and professional way of doing this. So I've been part of groups of people writing for each other to try and understand our situation more. But all the time we're doing that, we're just aware that in other places there is huge suffering. What we experience here is kind of practicing for something that may or may not happen. We're obeying all the rules, but it's the awareness of the wider community that is so painful, while at the same time we get on and build community locally. I guess that's where I am.
Thanks, Jan. So, and where we're up to now is I talked about the work Church Action on Poverty has been doing, the sense that there's a conversation going on where people are talking about how we can build back better after the pandemic, how we can do things differently, and trying to think what role Church Action on Poverty and the church can play in that. And thinking here in the collective particularly about reflecting theologically on it and what resources we have in scripture and our tradition that we can draw on when we're talking about it. So Chris has been talking about liberation theology. Sue said something about the work Al has been doing with lament and the theology of trauma, which is interesting. And that was kind of where we're up to. So in the document I shared around, the strands that I was interested in that I've sort of detected in what I've been reading, there were lament and whether we're a people of hope and what that means. But one of the big things is the sense that this is a kairos moment, whether that's a kind of idea that we could be using and drawing on. But it's important to stress that this is a chance to do things differently without making it feel daunting for people, that we can change things and it's not impossible, that we've seen how things need to change in the way we've reacted in our communities. That feels like a fruitful thing to talk about to me. And also with ideas of Jubilee, you know, that we can reset the injustices and start over fresh. And Greg Smith in Preston wrote some interesting stuff about Sabbath, coming more from an environmental perspective, but how it's a chance for a rest and that we're letting the world have a pause and time to recover. Is it whether we can talk about that? Marie?
I think we've got to be careful as well of like the notion that we don't want to put together like, oh, the pandemic, or what a lovely portal it's been.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when we come out of the other end and we build better, people's grandmas are still dead, people's fathers are still dead, you know, people have still lost their children. And I wonder about, you know, the work of the prophets. Like when I was reading this, there's so much kind of woe and hope mingled in with them, and they come out of disaster, really. You know, the people have been sent into exile, they've been forced marched across the desert. And we kind of, we feel in an exile moment. We're in exile from our lives. And I wonder if Isaiah has something to say to us, if Jeremiah or Ezekiel has something to say to us.
Yeah, the idea of exile and the idea of journey and being in the wilderness also.
Well, the idea of return as well, you know, due to Isaiah, it has a lot of visions, for building up ruins and walking in waste places again.
Al?
You may or may not have noticed, but as well as a recalcitrant printer, I've also got 2 kids at home at the moment. And that's been really quite a shift in my living and working patterns over the last little while. And I wonder, going back to I think it was Sue who started the thread on power. I think one of my questions is actually who do we look to for a lead in this next phase? And I'm conscious, certainly in my community here, that some of those who will be most traumatized by this period will be the children, but also the world that had opened up to me in the last year or so before we hit COVID-19 was the world of those saying, actually, we need to change the way we live because our planet will not sustain human life on it if we don't. And that movement was being led by our young people. And certainly the change that has happened in our own church here, in our thinking, in our ways of worshipping, and in the kind of actions that we take, have been led by our young people. So I think for me there are probably two things there, and they're about whose voices do we pay most attention to, and who do we look to for leadership. And I think one of the moments that I find myself coming back to again and again is Jesus placing the child in the center and saying, follow her and she will lead you into the kingdom of God.
It's interesting, a kind of related angle on was different perspective on that, I think, is internally at Church Action on Poverty. I've had Neil and other people putting the brakes on me a bit with some of this work, saying whatever we do also needs to be strongly led and informed by people who've got lived experience of poverty and what their experience of this are and what they want to happen going forward. So we're trying to make sure that that's part of our conversations. So that's another, I think, another angle on who to be led by, I think.
Can I just chip in really briefly, unusually for me, something that struck me when I was writing about this virus. You mentioned it in your document, Liam, about Jesus's healings and how they drew people back into community.
I was drawing on
in Mark 8, there's a healing of a blind man, and the thing that has stuck in my mind, and I can't shake it, is what Jesus says to him at the end when he's healed and restored. He says, do not go back to the village. Why did he say that? You know, lots of the time he goes, go to the priests or do this, but he says, do not go back to the village. And I just took it to mean you had an old way of life and it's bound up in that community, you know, who perhaps looked after you while you were blind. I don't know. That's not where you're going now. You're going to a new place.
Different perspective. Chris, you were putting your hand up as well, Chris Hughes.
Yeah, and just kind of picking up a couple of points in terms of Al's point about our young people. I mean, it's well known that when there's recessions, it's the younger members of our society who bear the brunt. So I think listening to their concerns, and I take Marie's point about, yes, people have suffered and aware, having done a dozen funerals and seeing people not being able to properly grieve, the mental health issues, you know. So in a sense, there's something about there's a need for healing as well as prophetic voices, but there's the compassion and echo again from Isaiah, you know, that wonderful vision of lions and cubs and wolves and sheep, and just the whole sense of a prophetic imagination. For me, hope, it's about a vision of what can be different. So again, Isaiah is a source worth exploring.
Outstanding. I'm aware Judith and Steph haven't had a chance. I don't know if I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to say something before I move on. If you want to say anything, is there anything you wanted to, Judith?
Yeah. I think what I'm becoming increasingly aware of is how this pandemic has magnified what's already been there. So I'm aware ever so slightly of some of the extra stress and anxiety. So people who are already living with stress, anxiety, and all of that, that that's just magnified, and that actually in order to get through this pandemic, they've gone into survival mode. I mean, I've read some research which shows that some people have had that temporarily and then got to the stage where they've got accustomed to life under lockdown and so on, and are to some extent thriving with it. But for others, that won't be the case at all. And if anything, it'll have got worse. And then, of course, there are people who have come into all this new, those who are having to use food banks for the first time, and that sort of group of people. And so I'm just pondering how to connect with those people who, if anything, have gone further away from dancing, to use Chris's image.
Yeah. Steph, did you want to say anything? Or?
I don't know. I think it's been interesting for me to see how different churches have responded and how some seem to have really stepped up and others haven't. And I've always been aware, like, our name is Church Action on Poverty, but we're not a church congregation or denomination ourselves. And it would be good, if anything, that we were doing or saying, we were able to get some of the major denominations and their leaders to sign up to, so that it could be something that the church, the whole church of all denominations across the UK could be saying, we're the people of God, and this is what God thinks of injustice or oppression or harm or inequality, and this is what God says life should be like, how we should be behaving towards one another. It would be good if we could, as the church as a whole, could manage to act a bit more like the conscience of the nation, holding government to account and showing government how to do things better.
Thanks. So that actually feeds in really helpfully to some of the next stuff I wanted to talk about, actually, which is kind of strategy. More, you know, what can we do with this? How can we have an influence on what's happening practically? But so just before we kind of drift into that from the theology side of things, there's loads of really fruitful stuff there, and we could spend a lot more time on it, I think. I'm wondering, my sketched in topic for next week is for Church Action on Poverty Sunday 2021, what we do for that and what resources we produce. And I'm thinking this might be our theme, this idea of new wine in new wineskins. So we could do some more focused reflection next week about how we take some of these ideas and get churches thinking about them and what we could use. Does that sound like a good idea to come back to it next week? Anyone got any thoughts on that before we move on? Nick?
I suppose I still think the issue of crisis is really important here, that the coronavirus has created a crisis, which is a judgment on our society. And it's going to take three or 4 years to work out what that meant. So we shouldn't rush into our own judgments about it, but wait to see what God's telling us over a long period, actually, maybe.
So maybe that's part of what we do.
But I think crisis might be a good subject for Poverty Sunday.
Okay, so we could come back and look at that. Al?
Just following on from that, from Steph's point before that about what church does. I think I'm conscious, certainly from the church watching that I've been doing over the last little while, that much of certainly the Church of England has got very internally self-obsessed over the last little while. And if the word crisis means anything in my denomination's vocabulary at the moment, it's about we're losing a shed load of money. We're potentially going to have congregation members who don't come back. And a lot of the talk seems to be about either how do we keep going in this time and kind of, provide the nation with that source of stability, with churches that are open, church buildings that are open, and all of that jazz, or how do we make a power grab for the space that we see opening, particularly in terms of people's spiritual engagement and stuff. And both of those worry me profoundly, because neither of them are particularly good or healthy in themselves, but also they squeeze out the space for precisely what we're talking about, I think. And so I wonder whether one of the things that needs offering into church space is not how can church take the lead, but how can church embrace this crisis to shut up and listen to the people that it's has not been listening to for years.
Thanks, Al. That's really helpful. Chris?
Well, just so we haven't mentioned about truth telling in this, and I just wonder if there's another aspect of the new future is about truth telling, because I don't imagine there's going to be this new future where climate change is going to be addressed properly, or where economics are going to be addressed properly by this government. It's not going to happen, and therefore it needs the church to speak out. And I think that don't want to talk about the Methodist Church, but the Anglican Church used to be divided about whether women should be priests or not, or whether LGBT people should be participation. Now it seems to be divided between those who think we should speak up against what the government has done and allowing maybe 65,000 people to die by not acting fast enough, particularly the most vulnerable groups, particularly people with disabilities, particularly Black and ethnic minority communities. Do we speak out to, and those who criticise people for speaking out against the government? I've lost more friends on Facebook over this by speaking out about Cummings coming to my northeast. Then I couldn't believe how many clergy threw back, do not judge others, so we can't speak out against injustice. But truth telling is going to be part, I think, of what Church Action on Poverty has done always really well. Because a lot of churches are excited by this. Zoom, wow, they've had more people coming to their Zoom services than their Sunday worship. Well, only some people are going to have access to that. 35% of people have had increased income because they're not going out and spending. And church communities are offering in that, so they feel kind of healthy. But the refugees I deal with, and the people out there that you're mostly dealing with, are not part of that 35% and are feeling crushed by all this. So I think some truth telling into the new environment is going to be important.
Judith?
Yeah, what came to mind as you were talking, Chris, was the question, fake news or good news? Because what struck me is that, and I could see it coming with the whole Dominic Cummings thing, and it's how Donald Trump works. If you just say something often enough, whatever the basis of that becomes the narrative, and that becomes truth. And somebody was saying the other day about how there's been a space opened up for all the conspiracy theories as to, where the virus came from and all of that sort of thing. And we know all about, statistics, analyzing and statistics, all that sort of thing, how you use the information. And so the prevailing narrative that becomes created is not necessarily, in fact, I'd say it isn't, what we might want to apply the word truth to. But what is good news? Is that truth? And how do we get to that good news and truth?
So, I'm hearing a challenge that what our role might be is not just in a simple way to get the bishops speaking out about injustice on our side and the sharing of vision, but to challenge the churches to listen better to people and to think about whose voices they amplify when they do speak out. But it's kind of those two things from Al and Chris come together somehow. And maybe that's something we could think about next week. I don't know. Marie?
I was thinking when Chris was talking, I was doing a piece of writing for Pentecost. So I was thinking for the last 2 weeks about the reading that we had on Sunday, where Jesus comes to the disciples in the upper room. He breathes on them, gives them his spirit, and gives them the power to forgive sins or to retain them. And everybody who said, do not judge, the power to forgive sins and to retain them. And we think, oh, forgiving sins, that's lovely. You know, we're setting people free, you know, it was wonderful. But there's a big responsibility there. How do we retain sins? How do we, without them eating us up in our anger, say, well, actually, I'm not okay with this. I'm still not okay with Dominic Cummins. I'm still angry. I retain it.
Excuse?
Yeah, I remember some lecture many years ago, David Jenkins saying, we shouldn't be frightened about judgment. We believe in a God who judges. Yeah, and you think of the sheep and the goats parable, you know, so in that sense, taking Marie's point, we do believe in a God who judges.
I'm also aware that there's a whole lot of other judging going on, so this isn't really straightly addressing that exchange, but I know we've got great community spirit. I know we're celebrating all that, but what I've actually heard from people I know quite well is the expression of fear. So I've heard people say, oh, I was out and they came too close to me. Oh, I don't like walking down that particular narrow track because people walk the other way and I don't feel safe. And I know, because I've got 6 grandchildren who I've hardly seen, that very small children are being trained to stay away from others. And in a way, we're having it imbued in us that every other person is a threat to us, really, because of what they might bring us in terms of the virus. That frightens me a lot, because there's a big issue of othering anyway, you know, by race or ethnicity or faith or all that. And now, yes, we are showing all these little signs of community care and generosity, but we are also being told to treat every other person as a threat. And that's a kind of judgment. And I wonder how churches can work on that with the idea that, you know, we're a community going on our journey towards the kingdom. We're not individuals going. And so from the beginning, I've opposed this business of social distancing. I hate that phrase because A, it's unclear, but B, it's also so wrong to tell us to push apart in society from each other. And I've always tried to use physical distancing, which I think is clearer and perhaps more sensible for the virus. But yeah, I'm just really bothered by the fact that small children are now hiding in doorways when their friends and relatives come because they're being trained up not to run out and greet them.
Aaron.
They're being trained to say thank you when you step off the path, though. Also, you know, I see that outside. They're being trained to thank people for removing the threat of themselves.
It's more of the long term.
I haven't noticed that, Marie, to be honest. Not in my experience, you know. In fact, I noticed the general level of greeting, which was really strong in our community. You know, I live in a small market town where everybody would greet someone when they were out, even if they didn't know them, because there were fewer of us about. That's gone. People march past you now. If you make space for them, they march past you and just don't make eye contact at all. Children nearly run you down their ruddy bikes. Sorry. But I'm just talking about it.
It's super interesting because I've noticed the opposite in a city.
It's weird, isn't it?
Absolutely the opposite. People smile hugely as you go past them at 2 meters distance. It's much more positive.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm not going to deny that, but I'm just saying I think we can get all very jolly and sentimental about how much we like each other, while the thrust of the argument is that person cannot come within 2 meters of me. We may smile at them, that's great, but actually we're being told that person cannot come within 2 meters of me because they may give me something that could kill me. I just think that's awful. Sorry, I'm going to go off this now.
That's going to be a hard thing to process when we start to move back to normal, isn't it? Just getting used to not being that way anymore. Has anyone got a contribution that they've been burning to make that hasn't had a chance?
I was very moved by the conversation that just happened, because my experience in a village where none of us has been totally isolated because the house is open straight onto the street. So all you have to do is open your door and you're having conversations with people, which is very healthy. I compared with my daughter living in a London suburb. I'm going to tell a story, it's very brief, but my granddaughter, one of my granddaughters is somewhere on the autistic spectrum, and she became terrified of stepping out of the front door because there was some big danger out there. And her parents are very concerned. Fortunately, the big danger didn't impinge on the back garden, so it was still possible for her to go outside. But this not going out of the door, was it people? Was it some nebulous otherness? And parents were trying to work out what to do. In the end, they waited until the street was completely empty. And then as a family, they went out and they chalked a hopscotch grid on the pavement. And they played hopscotch for about 10 minutes. And then they went in. So that made outside a safe, a place where you could still do something and where nothing awful happened. But the next bit was that as they sat in their front room and looked out of the window, they saw people coming along and children's heads bobbing as they played hopscotch. And then an adult came along and looked around and then also went down the grid hopping. I think that what Erin, my granddaughter, got out of this was seeing other people in the same space. It was a lesson for her about being aware of other people inhabiting the same space and being safe. And from my 500 miles distance, I was very moved to think that that kind of opening up awareness of others could happen even in this situation, or perhaps even impelled by this situation. So whether you're I don't experience people as being separated by this, but I think we need to be aware of how much fear, there is potentially, and creative ways of overcoming the fear.
That feels to me like it's connected to Chris's idea of dancing. That story, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. We're coming up on our hour, and I try not to go beyond the hour on all of these because of Zoom fatigue. I know everyone's doing a lot of Zooming. Sorry, Al, did you want to?
Sorry, just that final point reminded me of a poem which may even be one of Jan's from some years ago, or it might be someone else's, that begins, "Do not retreat into your private world," and ends with, "Close your eyes and dance within the storm." Is that one of Jan's? But I just wonder whether there's something in that image of dancing within the storm. One of the things I've found really helpful that some people have said recently is that we're not all in the same boat, but we are all in the same storm.
Yeah.
And that seems to be quite a helpful way of exposing those differences and divides, but also enabling us to kind of connect with compassion and solidarity within the storm. So I wonder if there's something in that.
Brilliant. Yeah, that feels really fruitful. So yeah, just I'm I'd really like to pick up on a lot of these themes next week and think about how we can get churches doing something with them over the coming year and on Church Action and Poverty Sunday next February. So I hope as many of you as you can might come and join and help us do that and write some stuff for us. The week after that, I've got this offer of the Wild Goose Resource Group are interested in working with us to put a publication together that might come out the year after that, which will be Church Action on Poverty's 30th anniversary. And I'd be hoping to commission people in the collective to write stuff for that. So I'd like to have a session the week after talking about that. And we've got a 4th session booked in that I haven't planned anything for yet. So has anyone got comments on those ideas for what we do in these sessions, or has anyone got stuff they'd like to suggest or things that they'd like to bring themselves before we finish? Marie?
This is just a short thing, but it would be nice to take some time to review the Lent publication.
Yes, that'd also be good, yeah.
Is this a good thing? Do we want more?
Yeah. Yeah, because because I'm on lockdown, I'm not thinking of everything that should have been on my list of things to cover in these. So thank you, that's brilliant. Yeah, possibly another one of those. So I'll work that in to make sure we cover it next week and maybe have an extra session at the end to talk about it in more detail if we're doing another. Okay, and I'll try and find ways to make sure we share stuff from these meetings. So if people can't come to everyone, there are ways to contribute and be involved without having to be here for the hour every week. So if I need to watch it out, Al said. And yes, bring whatever you want next time. Okay, yeah, I'm going to draw things to an end because we're past 12 o'clock, if that's okay. I hope we'll see lots of you next week or another week. If we don't, we'll try and stay in touch other ways. There's a Facebook group, there's the email list. We're all in touch with each other in other places as well, I think. I'm going to finish with a prayer from Raj Bharat Patta, who was going to be here today but had a church meeting. But he shared this prayer as a Pentecost benediction at the weekend. And it's picking up on what's happening in America particularly, so I thought that was a good place for us to finish. So, the Spirit of God is upon us, breathing a fresh breath of life, so that we go and challenge the knees of prejudice pressed upon Black, Asian, ethnic minority people. We go and bow a knee in solidarity with George Floyd and many others like him. We go bold in our dreaming, open in our becoming, fearless in our living, generous in our giving, tireless in our serving, committed in our loving, finding a new self in our being. The Spirit of God journey with us in our struggle for justice. Amen. Oh, and thanks for the poem, Al. Brilliant. That's really helpful. Hang on, I'm just going to make sure I copy that before I close this Zoom window. I don't know if it keeps the chat afterwards. I haven't done that yet. Here we go. It's not letting me select it now. Sorry, technical issues. There we go. Okay, thanks everyone. Oh, I'm losing my Zoom window. There we go.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you all. I hope you'll see some of you soon. If we don't, then we'll be in touch other ways. And thanks very much for everything today. Bye.
Bye. God bless. Bye.